Hello, and welcome to the Haaretz Election Podcast. I'm Allison Kaplan-Summer. Yet again, we are recording with one eye squarely fixed on the upcoming Israeli election and the other eye on the conflict between Iran and the United States. Israelis were braced for Donald Trump's threatened large-scale weekend strike on Iran, which seemed certain to pull them directly into the conflict. And then, early Sunday morning, came the news that U.S. President Trump said he had canceled, yet again, a strike against Iran after Middle Eastern countries asked Washington to hold off, claiming that the outlines of a deal with Iran had been agreed upon. So there may or may not be more Iranian missiles in Israel's future, but there will definitely be an election, and there is certainly a campaign. Joining me to discuss the developments of the past week, how they're affecting the conversations among potential Israeli voters, and, as we will get to, about Israeli citizens who may choose not to vote, are Haaretz columnist Dr. Dalia Shenlin and Haaretz correspondent Naram Zbidat. Welcome, Dalia and Naram.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for having us.
I am not in the studio, as you see, as those watching on YouTube can see. I'm recording remote during a stay in the United States, which currently has a travel warning to Israel. That's reassuring. The Israeli military is still on high alert, preparing defense systems for a possible escalation, which, if we believe Trump today, is not happening for now, but could still happen. Dalia, Naram, tell me, first of all, how you are holding up there, how the people around you are holding up. We've been through all of this before, but the roller coaster ride is not a lot of fun. And mostly, how is all of this uncertainty with Trump and Netanyahu, who was at the White House last week, affecting or not affecting the mood around politics and the election campaign?
Okay, I think that on the personal level, I'm going through what everybody's going through, which is fundamentally, I think, a sense of insecurity. It's hard to plan. People don't know if, not only, I think a lot of people talk about, can we go on vacation or not? Can we fly or not? For 100% of the people, it's a question of, will we be, locked into the neighborhood? Do we have to run into shelters? It's much more of a day-to-day reality than just the question of whether you get on a plane or not over the next few weeks. So I think that it's a different mentality when the wars are on, because you really plan minute to minute, barely. Everything you try to do during the day is interrupted all the time. You have a whole different set of noises around you. You hear the different kinds of alerts on your telephone. You develop an associative response to them. It's hard to think about things in a concentrated way. And that's a whole different mindset from regular life. That's on the personal level. I think that at the political level, in a way, I think that Israeli society has gotten used to the fact that there's never really a clear end for anything. That's what they got used to with Gaza. That's what they got used to with Lebanon. And that's what they're getting used to with Iran. And I don't see how it fundamentally changes the political dynamics we're seeing in surveys, because all of that has been factored in. And yet the surveys, as any listener has heard me say for a very long time, for about 2 years, have been extremely stable.
Naram, do you see things the same way?
For Palestinian citizens of Israel, the possible breakout of war with Iran will only add another layer of wars that we have been experiencing, whether it was in the crime violence in the Arab community, the violence in the West Bank, the ongoing war in Gaza Strip. It won't add a really significant difference, but rather another addition of trauma, of stress, of anxiety, which will refocus Palestinian voters from this upcoming election, because for now the question will be, will there be another war? Will our summer plans be any different? Another war with Iran will only add another layer of struggle.
So let's go over, as we like to do, with a look at the numbers as aggregated in the Haaretz election tracker, which averages all of the major polls over the previous week. Breaking things down by political bloc, there has been a tiny little fluctuation since last week. The Netanyahu bloc of the current coalition partners, Likud, the ultra-Orthodox, and the extreme right, has made it back up to 50 seats after dropping to 49 last week, which looked really low. The Jewish/Zionist parties that are opposed to Netanyahu, who say that they will refuse to join in a coalition with him, are hanging on at 60 seats, within striking distance of the 61 seats needed to form a coalition. And the Arab parties, taken as a bloc, stand at 10 seats. Any one of them obviously could make the difference for the opposition to bring them into a solid majority. Looking at the individual parties, Gadi Eisenkot's Yashar continues its slim lead over Netanyahu's Likud, polling at 23 seats to the Likud's 22. After that, the Bennett-Lapid alliance together at 14 seats, followed by the Democrats at 10, and then Lieberman's Israel Beitenu at 9. Other significant details to note: the brand new, debuted last week, Zionist Home Party. They won't commit to either supporting Bibi or opposing him. They're holding on to their debut 4 seats from last week. And Benny Gantz, once the golden boy of the opposition, his party continues to not cross the electoral threshold at all. There is, in the news last week, yet another bid for the right-wing non-Netanyahu space. Another former Netanyahu stalwart, former ambassador to the UN, Gilad Erdan, is officially jumping ship from Likud, appears to be starting yet another non-Netanyahu alternative Likud force, along with fellow defector and former Netanyahu minister Yuli Edelstein. And among the Arab parties, which we'll be discussing at length in just a bit, Hadash-Tal are polling at 5 seats, as is the United Arab List led by Mansour Abbas. The Balad party is under the electoral threshold. I always feel silly to start to analyze the polls when I have Dalia Shenlin, queen of the pollsters, with us. Dalia, can I just start by asking what you make of the numbers now and what they say to you?
Yeah, I think that they, frankly, a shift in the average of 1 or 2 seats has not changed the overall dimensions of the race. I mean, when I said that the polls have been stable for the last 2 years, I mean specifically from about September 2024, roughly, when Netanyahu's bloc stabilized at around 49 to 55 seats. In other words, that sounds like a big range, but in all of the hundreds of polls that have been done from all the different polling companies, let's talk about the mainstream polls for a minute, the ones who do polling for, these are mainstream commercial companies that also do political polling for mainstream television channels or newspapers. They all have the coalition parties, the current coalition parties, within the range of 49 to 55 seats over the entire 2-year period. There are some small shifts when the coalition gets to the higher edge of that range or to the lower edge of that range. Just for example, the most recent significant shift that we've seen was during the current war with Iran. It started in late February and went on until mid-April, when the coalition went up to the upper level of its range, but still never broke out of that ceiling within its range. And the same for Likud. But since then, both Likud and the coalition have drifted back down really to about the low 50-seat range or the 49 to 50-seat range. Likud is down in all of those mainstream polls to about 22, 21 seats. And let me put a footnote or get back to a footnote about the non-mainstream polls. We have 2 pollsters who poll, as far as I know, pretty much exclusively for right-wing media outlets in Israel. And they are viewed by Israeli society, and sometimes by their own admission, as skewed to the right, which they think is a better representation of Israeli society. The interesting thing is that even though those 2 pollsters always show the coalition parties doing better than the mainstream polls, the trend line was pretty much the same as the mainstream polls, in the sense that they have also shown stability. For the coalition parties throughout the last 2 years, no upward trend, no upward trajectory for those parties of the government. And just like the mainstream polls, the right-wing advocacy polls, they have also shown a decline ever since the ceasefire, the original ceasefire in the war with Iran. So they're showing Likud having declined from the mid-30s. And so they went down to, 31, 30, 28. And the coalition itself had them at maybe, like I said, 65 or so. That's down to either 61, 62. And in one case, the pollster for I-24, direct polls, has them down to 58, which is below a majority. And so it's notable that we're seeing a similar trend even in the right-wing polls, and even if they started from a different starting point.
Channel 12, in its weekend broadcast, said that there were 12% of Israelis who said that they were not decided between whether they wanted to vote roughly for the coalition or against the coalition. So I'm wondering if they're debating, okay, I'm right wing, but I don't like Netanyahu, and these alternatives keep popping up, if that may be partially responsible for the drift or for the trend line down on the coalition parties.
Yes, and despite what I said before, that outside events are having only very minimal effect, I do think that the downward drift of just a few seats that we've seen over the last few weeks, I actually think it does have to do with external events this time, despite what I said before, and that's because I think that the way the way that Trump developed the memorandum of understanding was seen as a blow to Israel. And then it came along with a renewed effort at a ceasefire in Lebanon, which Israelis were not happy about. And so I think that, and then there was all this, Trump open criticism and even humiliation of Netanyahu at several points. And I think it's, being portrayed in Israel, the idea that Israel was all revved up on some level to continue the war with Iran and then thwarted yet again because Trump doesn't really pay attention to what Netanyahu wants. There's this image, I think, among people who were basically sticking with Netanyahu because they saw him as a great global statesperson, close to Trump, able to continue the war on different fronts, really failing at those issues. Now, I think most of Netanyahu and the coalition's voters stay with him for other reasons, really. But those who are actually debating over that particular issue, I think that they were possibly upset about that. It's a little bit hard to say because some people, drifted away from Likud and went to Ben-Gvir and Smotrich, which is why we're not seeing big changes in the coalition. Ben-Gvir and Smotrich went up 1 or 2 seats when Likud went down 1 or 2 seats. So, there's some stuff that we don't actually know. We just know the combination of reasons. There are other questions being asked in surveys. And one of the important ones is which candidate is best suited to be prime minister. Up until now, and starting from mid-2024. All the other challengers either did not reach Netanyahu's status in that question, or maybe tied, or maybe pulled a little bit ahead, but barely and not for long. Gadi Eisenkot is right now, according to the Channel 12 poll, I believe, the last one, is running like 10 points ahead of Netanyahu. And in other polls, I've seen him even more than that, more than 10 points ahead. And so it means Gadi Eisenkot is still on the rise. He hasn't finished his rise in polls. He hasn't plateaued yet. If that's more than a bounce, if that's a stable trajectory, it could also indicate something about where polls may be going in terms of the party vote in the coming weeks.
We actually have something that looks different happening in the party politics right now. And I'm interested in what both of you think of what sounds like a radical possibility, something actually new. It's been reported widely across the Israeli media that Yesh Atid lawmaker Yoav Segalovich, Yesh Atid is Yair Lapid's party, that he's in advanced negotiations to join the United Arab List in a move aimed at strengthening the party's position as a political bridge between Israel's Jewish and Arab communities. And under the deal, Segalovich would be placed second on the party's slate after Chairman Mansour Abbas and serve as its candidate for national security minister. Presumably, this all grows out of Segalovich's high profile during that year-long change government when he was chair of the Knesset lobby to combat violence in Arab society. He's been very active in that issue. So it's quite intriguing, isn't it? A possible move to make Abbas's party easier to swallow in a possible coalition with the Netanyahu opposition. Naram, this is supposedly also stemming from Abbas's party creating a political separation between the Islamic movement, which is the religious organization that the party emerged from, about political decision-making and the selection of Knesset candidates. Do you think this is going to affect support for Ram if it happens, for better or for worse? And how do you think him bringing in a number 2 Jewish politician will affect his levels of support? Will it be a good thing or a bad thing?
In terms of Arab voters, I think it would affect it in a good way, because having a Jewish Israeli politician join the Arab Ram party, especially an Islamist political party, is something that we cannot overlook, which may be considered a significant milestone. However, I believe that joining Ram, especially out of all the Arab parties, is an expected move in which Ram may represent the image of a good Arab citizen in Israel that Israel tries to portray for the Israeli community, which again puts us in a situation where acceptance and empathy is conditional for Arab citizens.
Dalia, do you think this is some sort of magic formula that is going to push the opposition, healthily over the line?
I think that it's so unprecedented that I have a hard time predicting what it will do, and I'm interested to see polls, but I also think that this is the kind of thing that we could see the impact take time, because people have to think about it, they have to read the commentary, they have to talk to each other. I would be wary about trusting the first poll this week that comes out asking people what they think about it. I do think that beyond data points, beyond how many seats does Ram get in the next survey, I would look at whether the conversation changes around whether Ram could be brought into a coalition. And I think by changing the conversation, I mean the coalition parties and Netanyahu are hammering on about how Ram cannot be part of the government, or more accurately, they are accusing Gadi Eisenkot of not ever being able to form a government without Ram and trying to call them terror supporters. And I would be really curious to see if that conversation, seems to have less of an impact, if the Zionist opposition parties speak more openly about being open to going into a coalition with Ram. The whole conversation focuses on Ram. Nobody's really talking about the legitimacy of parties representing 20% of Israeli citizens being in the coalition in a general sense. It shouldn't be about whether Ram is a good party or a bad party, whether they support terrorists or not, because of course that's an absurd conversation. But it should be about the legitimacy of any party joining the governing coalition, especially when they represent, the biggest minority group in the country. And I wonder if this could open the door to just a broader and more honest conversation about the reasons why a party representing Arab citizens of Israel or Palestinian citizens should be in the governing coalition. But let's not set expectations too high. It's more like, could the Zionist opposition parties at least talk a little bit more openly about possibly bringing Ram into a government? I don't know the answer to that yet, but I do think it breaks down a lot of assumptions and images. What is a Jewish party or an Arab party? I never even know whether to call the Jewish parties or Zionist parties. And I never know whether to call the Arab parties or parties representing mostly Arab or Palestinian citizens of Israel, which is a lot to say. Or maybe they're actually Jewish Arab parties. Maybe this actually kind of puts the focus on the fact that parties can be formed over issues, over policy. The reason why it's Yoav Segalovich and not somebody else is because he really genuinely was committed to the issue of trying to, develop very intense programs in partnership with, I think, local and Arab community leaders about how to deal with the number one problem in Arab society inside Israel, which is organized crime. And so it's really a partnership over the things that politics should be a partnership over, not identity, but policy that affects people's lives.
Ram, speaking of open conversations, there's a sensitive topic that you have agreed to discuss on the podcast. You wrote about it in a column last January, which was headlined, "Why I, a Palestinian Citizen, Don't Vote in Israeli Elections." So given that you write about Israeli politics and you appear here on the Haaretz Elections podcast as a panelist, I thought it might be interesting and challenging to share with listeners the reasons why you don't vote, or at least why you haven't voted in the past. You are quite young, at least compared to some of us. You have never voted. Can you tell us why?
First of all, when we are talking about Israeli election, we're talking about the changing of governments, but changing faces, changing names doesn't necessarily mean for me or for other Palestinian citizens in Israel changing of policies. For many Jewish Israelis, the government changes, that means a lot of differences for their daily lives. Whereas for us, for Palestinians, while we feel like sometimes we shouldn't be discussing identity, for us, identity is our whole existence. We're not talking about daily struggles alone, but we're talking about survival. Especially in recent years, the Israeli government has shown a new face, which is the attack and assault of the whole Palestinian existence in itself. Given that the new democratic parties doesn't necessarily show any new changes, any new government, and any change in policies regarding our whole existence, survivals, struggles, there is not much of a talk about the right to return, national laws, and many more issues that we struggle with. On top of that, we have a lot of Palestinians whose lives are affected by the Israeli policies who cannot vote. We're talking about East Jerusalem, we're talking about Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, which Israeli politics and the Israeli government basically shapes their lives, and they cannot vote. They don't have a say in this election. Thus, we Palestinian citizens of Israel giving legitimacy to the Israeli Knesset, to the Israeli government to portray itself as a democratic state, as a state that allows for its minority groups to vote, to participate in this performance, only enables the daily occupation struggles that we encounter. Without this face that the Israeli government has shown in the past few years would go unnoticed for the international viewers, where Arabic is not spoken in workplaces, where the right to worship, the right to exist, the right to move freely between places is only something that we live but isn't shown on social media and international courts and international discussion. So changing faces for me, changing names, doesn't necessarily change my fate in this country.
Is it something that's discussed greatly among your peers, to vote or not to vote? We've had this conversation in the pages of Haaretz. The musician Tamer Nafar just wrote that he thinks that Palestinian citizens of Israel must vote, quote, to prevent our own death. He says voting should be viewed this time as a survival mechanism, and that I don't have the privilege of boycotting the election. But clearly you don't agree. Again, is it something that people talk about?
It is definitely something that is talking about. I'm not saying that my opinion represents the majority of Palestinian citizens of Israel. There has been a shift over the past few years after the war in Gaza. People who used to boycott the election now may vote because of recent organized crime that dominates their hometowns, their communities, their homes. Some may vote out of despair, not because they actually have faith in any change or in the government. Hence, what Tamer Nafar said in his article. And some may not, like some people who used to vote now choose to boycott the election and voting out of everything that the Israeli government has declared over the past few years, or what Israeli citizens have stated over the past few years. We see a shift in the young Israeli Jewish people in Israel who are leaning more to right-wing parties and aligning themselves with extreme right-wing.
I'm just going to disagree on one point. I mean, I think I have written in the past about how I understand a lot of the reasons why a Palestinian or Arab citizen of Israel would come to the conclusion that they're being used. And especially when the center and left says, hey, come on, you have to vote to save us from Netanyahu. It's like, okay, Jewish Israelis vote for Netanyahu and then beg Arab citizens to save them. I also argued at the time that the history of Arab citizens in Israel under different governments, historically under the Labor government and Likud governments, has, some of the worst things that happened to Arab citizens happened under Labor governments. And so here the left is coming along saying, I don't understand. Why don't you love us? I get that. Of course, I want Arab citizens to vote because I want every citizen to vote. And, I think that it's a privilege to be able to vote. Elections and voting are not enough to call yourself a democracy. Okay. But I do think that people should use the right if they have it. Everybody. I understand what you're saying about, leadership might change, but the society we live in is the society we live in, and it's not going to change. And that's true. It's not going to change overnight. But the only thing I've ever really seen that is successful at changing public opinion is leadership. Now, I can't tell you which among the current Zionist opposition figures have anything like a real vision and leadership for changing the direction of Israeli society. But I do think it's not going to come from the public. And I think that until there is a change of government and some leader from, those 4 or 5 leaders currently in the Zionist opposition parties says, we have to go much further. We need a complete change of course for Israel. We need to start talking differently. We need to stop making Palestinians into the enemy. We need to stop talking about the military, as the solution to everything. And if one day somebody comes to that kind of transformative vision, I think that's the only thing that will change society. And so I think it's a condition. I just don't think it's going to come from the people themselves. So I feel like either way, the people aren't going to change overnight. But I would like to think that maybe a leadership change will eventually lead to that. But you're looking at me like you don't believe it. And I would understand if you don't believe it.
First of all, I would like to acknowledge the statement that it is a privilege, because it is a privilege, whereas where I just said that Palestinians in the West Bank, in Gaza, and in East Jerusalem, they cannot vote, but the election shapes their lives. And it may sound or look that I'm turning my back over this privilege, and because I have received attack and backlash over my column that I wrote, I do live the reality that Palestinians live, because I am myself a Palestinian. I have many other rights, I have many other privileges that are not given to me, and I cannot earn them, because I am not the Palestinian, I'm not the citizen that the public and the Israeli government wants me to be. I don't believe the Israeli Knesset will fulfill my needs as a Palestinian. And while maybe some other rights, some other laws might benefit me through the Israeli election, I feel like the real change will happen from the public, from the society. And whereas we have governmental figures trying or trying to announce that they want a further change, I don't believe that this will be achieved, because the change always happens from within, from the society, civil movements, civil organizations, protests. These kind of gatherings and incidents will actually create the change, from getting both people to know each other, to understand this issue and our shared struggles. Otherwise, for me at least, I don't believe any change will happen to my life or Palestinians from an Israeli government institution that doesn't accept my existence.
Wow, Neram, thank you so much for sharing that with us. This kind of moves us into something else that happened over the past week. I think, in terms of how much these issues are on the table during the election, or allowed to be on the table during the election, from the point of view of the Jewish Zionist parties, which are trying to get as many votes as they possibly can. Dalia, can you just tell us about a mini kerfluffle that happened within the Democrats Party, which is in a little bit of an energy surge?
Well, to my mind, this is a tension between, ideology and campaign strategy on the one level. It's something that every campaigner, or every candidate, every party, and really anywhere there's competitive elections will address at some point. Do I say what I really think, even if it might cost me some voters, or do I try to be strategic so I can, appeal to lots of voters without getting into, the positions that are more controversial? So this is not an unusual dilemma. But just to explain to the listeners what happened. So I think it was Ynet first reported, as far as I know, that there was a leak from an internal meeting of the Democrats Party, and it's a party that whose party leader came from the IDF. I mean, he was Deputy Chief of Staff, Yair Golan. He is positioning himself very clearly as, a Zionist, and he's trying very hard to convey his credentials, both at the security level, at the level of being committed Zionist and patriot, and, staking out a left-wing position. But the truth is, he's not really doing that himself. He's kind of outsourced that to the list. And the people on his list who were voted in the primaries last week, some of them are much more outspoken, particularly on issues of the occupation, something I wrote about because I was frankly surprised, given how cagey he himself has been about it, because he's trying so hard to appeal to centrists. Altogether, I should say, the self-identified left-wing in Israel among the adult population is about 20%, but it's only about 12 to 14% among the Jewish population. The Arab higher rate of self-identification as left raises that average, but it's not very high. And so he wants to branch out to the center. So he had been cagey. But people on his list, some of them are really very openly demanding, not just talking, but demanding that Israel, or that their party, take a clear position against occupation, against constant military campaigns, and move towards recommit to diplomacy, talk about really reaching a final status, comprehensive peace agreement with the Palestinians, et cetera, things that we have not heard in Israeli society in a long time. And so the leak of this internal meeting was one of the more committed, well, she's really a human rights lawyer, activist, Gabi Lasky, basically saying to Yair Golan, the leader of the party, why are you talking about the attack that happened in Chavat Gilad in the West Bank? attack, I mean, it was sort of a series of, well, I don't know, a settler incursion basically into a Palestinian village that ended with clashes in which 4 Palestinians were killed and 2 Israelis were killed. It was being widely reported as a Palestinian terror attack in Judea and Samaria. And she said, at the very least, couldn't you call it the West Bank? Or, I mean, I'm paraphrasing the nature of the conversation. And he was saying, well, I actually think it is Judea and Samaria. And so he wasn't saying I'm pro-settlement, but it was indicative of this tension between, was he really expressing that he sees this in what has become the mainstream Zionist terminology for the West Bank, Judea and Samaria, or is he saying, well, I really need to be able to appeal to the mainstream Zionist center by calling it that? And she was saying, strategically and ideologically, we should be who we really are. So I think the strategic dilemma is not unique to any party, left or right. And I think that it also could be seen and framed very differently, not as an internal struggle or, some sort of existential problem for the party, but a typical and legitimate argument over what the party really stands for, which I think is healthy, right, for a political party to have that kind of argument. In fact, it's an argument that could be had in public, but it was framed as a leak that reveals these horrible internal dynamics. What we've seen is from the party leader, Yair Golan, that he much prefers to keep it safe. From his perspective, he has refused to even practically to say the words two-state solution or Palestinian state. Certainly, I don't think he even uses, I barely think he's talked about occupation at all. But it's like he leaves it to the people on the list to do that. And is that good strategy? In my opinion, as a political consultant, for only the last, 27 years, I think that we have seen a shift to what he's representing is becoming passé. It used to be that we thought about micro-targeting to every little possible group and sort of moving into your target groups that were just a little bit out of reach. And if you spoke in exactly the right way, you could win them over. But I think what we've seen in the last decade or so is that honesty is the new campaign. Be who you are, even when it's over the top. That's why we're seeing such surprising winners, in other parts of the world, because they just say these outrageous things and suddenly it's all okay. So, I mean, I don't think he should become a right-wing populist, but I do think that voters are onto us with relation to the political campaigns. They started to realize when you were talking in messages that were designed to be cautious, and it bores them and it makes them cynical and it makes them think you're hiding something. And personally, strategically, I think it's time to get beyond that. I don't think Yair Golan is going to earn one more vote. Forget about seats. I don't think he's going to earn one more vote if he uses the term Judea and Samaria versus West Bank. We know that Israeli society has branded most of the parties at this point. There was one of the polls that came out last week, tested of all voters, which of the parties do you think are most extreme? And trust me, among the coalition voters, everybody thinks that Yair Golan's party is extreme, right? And even some of the opposition voters. So I think that people have already typed the parties, but they asked about every party. One of the things I found interesting, by the way, was that among the opposition voters, the most extreme parties were the ultranationalists, Ben Gvir and Smotrich, and even Hadash was there and Balad, but Ra'am was like 29%. It was like, huge gap. In other words, the majority, a clear majority, a firm majority of opposition voters did not see Ra'am as an extremist party, which is interesting. It's just, on some level, it means that Netanyahu's campaign isn't working.
Naram, as a Palestinian citizen of Israel, what do you think of the fact that this is what's going on inside the furthest left Zionist party? And in general, I'm interested in how your circles where you live and your friends and family view these parties and the rise of Gadi Eisenkot. Do they see him as being any different from the rest?
We're talking about another army official. We're talking about an alternative for Netanyahu who has the same vision regarding Palestinians as other parties. We have Netanyahu declaring honestly what he feels, what he knows, what he wants to represent about the Palestinians. So circling around the truth and what you believe and what you see and what you think of Palestinians will not serve anyone. It won't help you achieve more Israeli votes, and it definitely won't help you achieve more Arab votes. We reach a desperate point. We need to get rid of Netanyahu, and we don't care who is the alternative. And the touching topics that have not been discussed before could actually benefit them into getting more views and maybe just stirring the conversation.
as we tend to do, I'm interested in what you're looking forward to in the next week of Israeli politics. And Dalia, if you want to weigh in on what's going on in U.S. politics in Michigan, what you think we're going to be looking forward at in terms of Democratic primary congressional race in which Israel-Palestine has been at the center.
Yeah, well, I think that what we're seeing in Michigan is yet another example, like we saw in the New York primaries, of the Democratic Party facing that split between its mainstream establishment community with a traditional focus on pro-Israel policies in a very old-fashioned way versus people who are much more on the progressive side and much more critical of Israel in general and much more critical of the U.S.'s role in Israel. And I think that it's interesting that it's like really over the last 2 months, we've seen Abdul Sayed just pull ahead in surveys, really, of Stevens and really is, I think, running about 15 points ahead now. So it looks from the surveys right now like we're going to see another upset in that direction, which I just think is very interesting. It wasn't just a one-time situation in New York or something. That's what I think. And in terms of what I'm looking forward to here, I am very curious to see how the right-wing wildcard parties, the new one that is crossing the threshold right now, Zionist Home, that's what it's called, Beit Zioni.
They all sound the same.
They are crossing the threshold with 4 or 5 seats now. I'm still not totally convinced. I want to really see that that's stable, right? It's only been a week or 2 since they were crossing the threshold, so I'm waiting to see more evidence. And I do want to know if the new right-wing party that is supposed to be established by Gilad Erdan actually comes to fruition, and if that one can cross the threshold. And I'll be curious to see which parties they take away from, because that will matter when it comes to coalition building. Especially if they remain wild cards. I have a feeling that by the time we get closer to the election, they won't be a wild card anymore. I think people will demand to know where they're leaning coalition-wise or opposition-wise. Nevertheless, despite what I said before, I am curious to see the first polls that will come out testing the elections in general and what people think about Segalovich possibly joining Ra'am. And I want to know that now, not because I will trust that that's the final word, but to see where attitudes move in the next few weeks and months if it does actually happen.
I'm also really excited to see the new surveys, what would they show, especially with the new updates. How would the Arab citizens react to such news? Would it attract more voters? Would it actually give them a little bit of hope that maybe we do have a representative in the Knesset? Will it make any change? Because so far, everyone I interviewed for the election, they knew that there is not much of a change, but they wanted to put an end to at least the organized crime. So will that help? Will that not help? We will see.
Thank you so much, both of you, for joining me. Naram, thanks.
Thank you.
Dalia, thanks as always for coming on.
My pleasure.
And that's it for this episode of the Haaretz Election Podcast. Thank you so much to these guests, Dr. Dalia Shenlin, Naram Zvidat, and to producer Dan Brumer and editor Adi Shacham. If you want to continue to listen to our podcast or watch it, make sure you don't miss an episode. Subscribe to us on YouTube or on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're so inclined, leave a comment or a 5-star rating, and that way more people can find us. And to keep up with all of the news on Israel, the Middle East, and the Jewish world, don't forget to subscribe to and follow haaretz.com. I'm Alison Kaplan-Summer, and until next time, shalom. Not this time from Tel Aviv, but in the future from Tel Aviv.